Three, two, one, and we are rocking and rolling. Welcome back to the Seb Whitehouse show. I am really looking forward to the conversation that I'm going to have today. I am joined by a guy that I have been following on Facebook for several years now. I read all his blog posts. I keep up to date with all his adventures. We've had a few nice chit chats over Facebook, but this is the first time we have ever spoke in person. We were in Lisbon at the same time a month ago. We didn't manage to meet up. But this is a man who is constantly on adventures. He does more in 2 months than some people do in a lifetime. I'm extremely happy to be joined today by Joe Skeats. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining me.
Hey man, thanks for that awesome introduction. And yeah, I'm stoked to get chat in person too. I've been following your adventures for a while, and it's cool to connect at last.
It is. So I guess the first thing I'm going to say is, what do you call yourself, Joe? As in, when someone says, what do you do? How do you respond? Are you a writer? Are you a cyclist, a hiker, a sailor, a storyteller? When people ask me who I was doing a podcast with today, or like who my next podcast was with, I literally just say adventure man. I'm talking to Joe Skeats and he's an adventure man. How do you think of yourself and what do you refer to yourself as?
Well, I'm flattered. Yeah, identity is quite a tricky one. I definitely think of myself first and foremost as a writer slash storyteller. And it is mostly about adventures. So I guess adventurer would also work, but it's a tricky one. Like sometimes I have to fund this lifestyle by working in a cafe. Over much of COVID, I was stuck in Norway working in a hotel or in a hospital. And so I don't think identity is as much what I'm doing right now. Like when I'm in a cafe, I don't think of myself as a barista. I think it's kind of all work into that identity that I want to be part of, which is adventurer, writer, storyteller. Travel, I guess, is at the heart of it.
Awesome. Let's make sure everyone knows exactly what we're dealing with here, right? Every time I look at social media, as I said, it seems like you're on some incredible or inspiring mission in faraway lands. And I'm sure you've heard that a lot. And the thing is, people say that to me as well. So people always say to me, oh, it always seems like you're up to this or you're up to that. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I do go on some adventures from time to time. I do push myself out of my comfort zone, but actually I do spend quite a lot of time at home. I do spend quite a lot of time in Bristol. And sometimes between my adventures and missions, there's months or even years. The same cannot be said for you. Right? As far as I'm aware, you are someone that is constantly on the move. So if people think I'm adventurous, if people think I'm well-traveled, Joe takes it to a whole new level. Can you kind of just give everyone a list of what you've been up to over the last, I guess 5-6 years? Like if you were to give a brief summary of your adventure CV, what are some of the things you've done recently?
Well, yeah, it's been since I finished university 7 or 8 years ago now. It's been pretty much one adventure straight leading into the next. So from university, I decided I was going to cycle to Australia. I thought that would take 1 year, and 3 years later, I finally cycled into the Sydney Opera House. So I was much slower than I expected to be. And I just made so many connections along the way that kind of one adventure led organically into the next. So as soon as I cycled into Australia, I worked for a couple of months to save up some more money and then got the opportunity to sail across to South Africa. So that was 3 months on a tiny boat alone in the Indian Ocean with the closest people on the space station, hundreds of kilometers ahead above us.
Wow, that's amazing.
Then I've cycled across South Africa. I worked for a hiking magazine for a year. So they sent me off on lots of hikes and I had to write the articles for them. With COVID, I got stuck on a tiny Arctic island in Norway with an artist, a fisherman, and a trumpet player. So I was there 5 months, just kind of getting to know this bizarre and quirky community.
So there was 5 of you?
There were, 4 or 5 of us.
For 5 months in the Arctic during COVID?
Yeah, it's like the start of a joke. It was absolutely
No, it really
bonkers.
is, yeah.
And that was, of course, coming off the back of sleeping in more or less a different place every night. Suddenly I'm stuck on this tiny island. And so that was quite a shock, but also I loved really slowing life down and realizing that I didn't need to travel so widely. I could also travel deep.
Yeah.
Just immerse myself into the same place, the same community. And that's kind of changed a lot about how I want to do adventures in the future. I don't want
That's
to be.
that's really interesting because I think a lot of people associate adventures like this with like sleeping in a different place every night and traveling across many different countries and many different continents. And I guess in many ways, you kind of do have to do that. You do have to have that experience. Like, it's easy for you to want to change your mode of traveling into staying in one place for longer because you spent 3 years cycling from England to Australia. So you've kind of scratched the itch of wanting to be in a different place every night. But I do find it really interesting, just the idea of like slowing down and realizing that a lot of these travels, like you say, it can be something a bit deeper in one place, more of an internal personal journey. But I think I'm probably right in saying you probably needed to get those big adventures out first before you could start dwelling on staying in one place for too long, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I look at my adventurous friends and I kind of see them go through the same trajectory where they go and do these huge trips. And I almost think of it like reading a blurb of a book for each country. Like you get a little taster, and then you work out what appeals to you, what kind of countries you like to travel to, and then you just have this hunger to go a little bit deeper. And also, it's quite unnerving, quite dizzying to travel so quickly. And there really is something to be said for slowing down, having a community. And so, yeah, I think you can travel widely, you can travel deeply. There's perks to both.
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. 100%. So when you cycled from England to Australia, you mentioned you were hoping it would take 1 year and it ended up taking 3 years. Just to just to lay this out for people that are listening, like cycling from England to Australia, this is no small feat, but I think you need to take into account the texture and the detail of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. This is not luxury hotels. This is not staying somewhere every night because it would cost way too much money. This is sleeping in the great outdoors. This is wild camping in loads of different destinations. And this is literally passing across nearly the entire world from the seat of a bicycle. It is an incredible achievement. I respect it and admire it. I'm also quite jealous. I've only cycled the length of Great Britain and it was one of the best things I've ever done. And I did that over 4 weeks. So I just can't imagine what being on the road for 3 years must be like. So can you give me a little rundown? What countries? Let's kind of like lay this out a little bit. What countries did you cycle through?
Yeah, so there's 33 of them in total. So it's quite a long list.
That's insane.
I crossed Europe from England to Turkey.
And what route did you take? Did you go over the Alps or did you go through Germany? Did you go underneath?
Yeah, so my whole trip is kind of zigzaggy. It follows more or less the way an ant walks, like not in a direct route. Just where takes my fancy.
That's why it took you 3 years, mate.
Exactly, mate. I could have been a lot quicker. So I went through France, Switzerland, Germany, over the Alps through Austria and into Slovenia.
What time of year was this? Summer, I guess. Spring, summer.
Spring, summer, yeah.
Sure.
And this was all kind of Western Europe. It felt familiar. And then I crossed from Slovenia into Bosnia and everything changed. It was like, wow, I didn't know there were places like this in Europe. It was just Muslim country, signs of the war. There were still landmines, so I had to be careful where I camped at night. I might be overtaken by horse and carts on the road. And it was just this amazing realization that, again, the world is so diverse. And even the continent that I thought of as home, there's people living lives that I can't imagine. And it was here that I met 2 German cyclists that were coming home from Singapore. And they listened to a few of my stories and then said, "You're cycling too fast, dude. Like you need to slow down." And they were different to all cyclists I'd met before. They said, "We never cycle more than 100 kilometers a day. Normally we do 80 or 70. And of course, this was totally different to most cyclists who are boasting about, "Oh, I did 200 kilometers today. We're so fast." And so I camped with these 2 Germans for a couple of nights and listened to their photos, videos, and stories. And more or less overnight, I decided, right, I'm going to slow this trip down. I don't want to be racing through countries. I want to really experience it. And so from then on, I searched for the smallest, slowest, most dilapidated, broken roads I could find, just in search of people and adventures. Because I wasn't a cyclist. I was very much a traveler. So I continued with this approach through Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, Greece, and then cycled into Istanbul. And I remember sitting there looking over the Bosphorus Strait across to Asia, which was just so enticing. I continued across Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, all these countries I'd never heard of. And then my trip came to a crushing stop when my Chinese visa got denied. And I was totally blocked. I couldn't go north through Russia, couldn't go south through Afghanistan. And I just thought, my trip's failed. I'll go back home. And I was devastated. But then the next day, I realized that I'd set off for adventure. And that was what I really wanted. So I took a short plane and a 3-day train to the southernmost point of India and turned around and more or less began heading north. And I'd never planned to go to India. I could name like 3 or 4 towns and cities in the whole country. All I knew was I needed to head north. So every day I'd speak to locals and say, shall I go this way or this way? Shall I follow the mountains or the coast? Where's more beautiful? And they'd say things like, there's my sister's having a wedding in this city. Come join. Or, there's a festival here next week. Come and join us. And so I kind of had this trip tailor-made by the local people, which was it made India one of the best experiences, which I'm hoping we'll get onto.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is this a good point for the story about the WhatsApp group, or did you want to sort of get to Australia first and then come back to India?
No, I'll crack on with India now if you want.
Go on, yeah, let's crack on with India now. I'll just say, I read this blog post a few years ago and it was just brilliant, and I've repeated it to quite a few people. It's one of my favourite travel stories that has nothing to do with me, that I didn't experience. So the fact it's even on the list is quite impressive, because I'd much rather tell my own travel stories. But on this one, I tell yours. So why don't you share this story?
Yeah, so this is kind of the story about how I became an accidental Indian celebrity and kind of had my own personal Forrest Gump moment. So it all started when my school in England set me up with their partner school in India and arranged for me to give a talk and stay with the head teacher. So I gave a talk to the pupils, talking about my trip, and they loved it. And the head teacher passed me on to the school in the next town. And then that school passed me on to the next school. And before I knew it, I was being interviewed by a newspaper. And it was the Indian national newspaper. And they ran a story about how I was cycling around the world for world peace. And then things just got absolutely mental. And pretty much every day I was being invited, interviewed by newspapers or on television. And I gave a talk to a running club in Mumbai. And they said, wow, this is great. We want to help you. And so they created a WhatsApp group and they invited all their friends, all their family, total strangers. And they said, okay, we're going to help you. And this WhatsApp group had about 100 people in it. And they were very well connected people. And so every day they'd try and find people for me to stay with. And sometimes they had friends or family. And if they didn't, they'd just email a cycling club. And I might have a whole cycling club of 50 or 60 people cycling with me, taking me out for dinner, inviting me to stay at their house, and then passing me on to the next cycling club. And if they had absolutely no contact, they'd just contact a hotel and be like, oh, hey, can you host this guy for free in your hotel? And so unbelievably, for 4 months in India, I stayed with local people or in hotels for free every single night.
Oh my God.
It just led to the most bonkers experience. I stayed with a rocket scientist and watched him launch a rocket into space. One day I found myself on the phone with the Prince of Bhutan, and he was saying, I just want to make sure you're coming to Bhutan also. And then when I eventually crossed into Nepal, I was greeted by the Communist Party president, and he filled in my visa paperwork and then took me back to his hotel for dinner. Wow. And it was just this like dizzying carousel of crazy, crazy people. And yeah, I had one guy who cycled with me for 3 days, and he was 17. And he said, I haven't even cleaned my teeth. Man, I'm going to be so grounded.
So this is literally this WhatsApp group. Am I right in saying it sort of just grew and grew organically, and every day, whether you had somewhere to cycle, whether it was 40 miles away or 50 miles away or 60 miles away, you were continuously being kind of sent in your direction to the next spot?
Yeah, so like I said, I'd never planned to go to India, and every day this WhatsApp group would just come up with sometimes as many as like 7 or 8 suggestions of people that I could stay with and were willing to host me. And they'd say, do you want to stay with this guy in this town or this guy in this town?
That's amazing.
This guy's a cyclist. And it was absolutely, I mean, my trip was so people focused. And so,
Yeah.
so to always have someone waiting for me at the end of the day, and someone, it was so exciting to cycle, just knowing, oh, who am I going to meet tonight?
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, do you still have that WhatsApp group? Are you still, is it still active on your phone? Because hey, who knows?
Yeah,
I might need it one day.
yeah, it would be very useful. Yeah, it's still active.
Is it?
I'm still in contact with a lot of people. India was absolutely my favorite country.
That's absolutely awesome. So, how many miles a day, before we get to India and then in India, how many miles a day were you cycling? You mentioned that when you met these German guys, they told you to slow it down, which I think is really good advice because, like I say, the only cycle touring I've done is Land's End to John O'Groats, but a lot of people do that in like 10 days or something or 2 weeks. And I did it over the course of a month. And I did it in the same sort of way that you did your trip. I zigzagged. I went through Dartmoor even though I didn't have to. I went over the Brecon Beacons even though I didn't have to. And it was just so much better for that reason. And it took longer, but it really is about the journey, not the destination. So how many miles a day were you doing until before you met these German guys? And then how did your trip change? And by the time you got to India, what was your daily mileage roughly?
Yeah, I remember speaking to you before you did Le Jog, and I was really glad that you did take the slower itinerary rather than just racing across. And that is generally my number one piece of advice to
Mm,
other people that want to do a bike tour is give yourself as much flexibility
mm,
as you can. So when I set off, before I met the Germans, I was pretty much trying to do 50, 60, 70 miles a day. And that meant that I had to say no a lot. If someone invited me to dinner or for a cup of coffee, which happens surprisingly often because if I cycle into a tiny village in Montenegro, I stand out. People want to know, oh, where are you cycling? Where have you come from? And the moment you say, oh, I've cycled from England and I'm going to Australia, there's something a little bit unique about you.
mm,
And I had to say no to a lot of that. And after I met the Germans, that was just everything was a yes. I was a total yes man.
mm.
Do you want to come for a coffee? Oh, I've only done half an hour cycling today, but sure. Oh, do you want to stay the night? Oh, it's 9:30 a.m., but sure. And so generally I cut it down to kind of between 40 and 50 miles a day.
Mm, mm,
But sometimes, I mean, I cycled over the Pamir Mountains in Tajikistan,
mhm.
which is just this really needlessly mountain route, kind of up to 4,700 meters, which is crazy to head up that high on a bike. And I was doing maybe 20 miles a day and just absolutely exhausted. But
Mm,
it's one of the highlights. I really learned a lot about the relationship between difficulty and positive. I think in general in our society, we try and shy away from uncomfortable things. But I think that things that are uncomfortable often then lead to the greatest reward. It's all about pushing comfort zones. So if
yeah,
it's going to be hard to cycle this route, that's probably a good thing to do.
100%. And it's always so much more special and so much more beautiful when you get off the big roads and off the beaten track. And I really admire and agree with your approach of like, if there's two roads in front of you and one is a straight, flat, easy road that will get you there in 2 days, and the other one is a winding mountain valley, which you don't even know if you can definitely get the bike across and it might take a week, you've got to do the weak one. You've just got to do the, it's just like, that's just what has to happen.
It's rude not to. I had exactly this situation in Albania where the road forked, and the one on the left was the new road that went to the same town of Peshkopi, and it was flat and tarmac and paved and would take 2 hours. And if I went right, that would take 2 days. And I had to pick up a stick because there were wolves in the area, and it was going to be exhausting work. And 2 days later, it was the most exciting, memorable part of the trip so far.
Mm.
And it kind of scared me that I could have arrived here yesterday in 2 easy hours, but look at what I'd have missed out on. All these tiny villages and the mountain landscapes. And although I was shattered, it just seemed like so obviously the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that you did bump into those German guys. But I think you would have discovered this. You would have discovered this regardless. It was within yourself already. I think you deep down probably knew that. It just takes a while sometimes to kind of be honest with yourself, I guess, because you're doing this big trip. You're obviously you're putting some degree of pressure on yourself because it's a huge undertaking. So you're having a lot of conversations in your head about a lot of difficult topics such as geography, logistics, where you're going to stay, where you're going to feed yourself, isolation, loneliness, fatigue, physical fatigue. So there's a lot going on in your head, you know, and you're dealing with it all on your own. So I guess, you know, you're putting this pressure on yourself to do a certain distance and, you know, I've got to do this, otherwise I might not get there and da 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 da. And then at some point, you know, you spoke to those guys, but it would have happened in some other way. It's just really great and it's really interesting that the penny just dropped and you're like,
Yeah, totally.
I get it. Now I know, I remember now what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm on an adventure. I'm not on a like you know, you're not racing anyone. You're on an adventure. And I suppose once that penny dropped, your whole trip must have just improved.
Yeah, it was totally a turning point. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the most beautiful country you cycled across? I know that's quite the question, but I guess what stands out, you know, 33 countries from England to Australia, even though I'm sure you can argue the toss and you can go back and forth in your head, is there one that comes into your head straight away?
I'd probably have to say Kyrgyzstan,
Really?
which
What,
is
because of the Pamir Highway?
yeah, I'd never heard of Kyrgyzstan before. I didn't know anything about it, and it's called the Alps of Asia. I've since found out, and it is just mountains and rivers and meadows of wildflowers, and it's all dirt roads. So for cycling, you can really get off the beaten track. You cycle past nomads that are heading up to their summer pastures to live in yurts. Maybe they'll invite you to stay the night. I slept with 4 or 5 kids that had 100 cows and sheep and goats, and they had to move every 2 weeks looking for the freshest grass. But
Wow.
yeah, it's got hills, it's got mountains, it's got glaciers. It's just an absolutely stunning country.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I've actually done a lot of, I've looked into the Pamir Highway quite a lot. You know, I was planning a big ride from England to India myself, but just life got in the way and I didn't make it happen. But I feel like I've actually done so much research into it that I feel like I know the route in my head, and the Pamir Highway just looks absolutely amazing. And I remember I was relaying to my uncle that someone had said to me, why would you do that? Someone just said, like, why would you do that? And my uncle said something that stuck in my head. He said, well, if they're asking, they don't deserve to know the answer, or something like
That's
that, you
it.
know? You know,
That's
and
it. You need that curiosity like that.
yeah,
Why go there? What is there? And
yeah.
if you've got that curiosity, then you don't need to ask why.
Yeah, well, George Mallory, the famous Everest mountaineer, when he was asked why does he keep going up Everest, he said because it's there.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a good response, and that's why that response is very famous. And I've been thinking, you know, just this morning and the build up to this conversation of like, what is it about me? Why do I like going on adventures, and why do I like doing things that make me feel slightly uncomfortable? And it is because it's there. But it's also something more than that, isn't it? It makes you feel connected with the world, and it makes you feel connected with yourself. And for want of a better term, it's good for the soul. I mean, why have you personally given a lot of thought into like, why are you someone that is doing all of this? Is it a desperation to live life to the full because you don't know you don't know what tomorrow brings? Is it just this like, are you just following your intuition, your soul, your spirit? Like, because so many people don't have the desire to do what you're doing, and they don't have the courage or the bravery, and like I say, even myself that's done a fair bit of it has not been as consistent and relentless with it as you have been. Do you have any insight on what it is that drives you to go on all these crazy missions non-stop?
Well, you said before you spoke that this was one of the themes that you wanted to discuss in this conversation. And my immediate instinct was, I've got no idea why I do these trips or where that impulse comes from or where this instinct comes from. But I've given it a bit of thought, and I think it's a sense of permanence. I think these experiences and memories will last as long as I will. They will outlive any material possession. They will outlive anything I could spend the same money or time on. I think it kind of all comes back to a moment at university where I was studying law, and I looked around at all my friends and family, and I was like, none of them seem to enjoy the jobs that they do. And that's a lot of time that you give to your job. And I also remember I was good at law, I liked law, but I wasn't passionate. It didn't excite me. And when I started reading about these adventures, there was something about it that just kind of made sense. And I think that is where the motivation comes from. And I think over time it shifted. So it's not just me selfishly going on adventures, trying to learn about the world, trying to create these epic memories, but it's almost more of a purpose to also share. I've been writing, photographing, public speaking, and I love the extra meaning that all these kind of ways of storytelling also give to my own personal trips. So it kind of is instinct, it's impulse. I get a gut feeling when one of these opportunities arises. It is about that permanence, and then it's also about then almost this responsibility, this burden that I've got the ability, the skills, the opportunities to go off on these adventures, and I can use that to share a message with others.
Yeah, and I think another way that I've been thinking about it recently, as I get a tiny bit older, I'm 32 in a week. How old are you?
I'm 28.
28. So as I get a tiny bit older, I'm starting to think to myself, it's as much about physical health as much as anything as well. You know, the older you get, the harder it can be to do these things. It's about really seizing the moment and doing them while you can in a way as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. When I started these trips, it wasn't much about exploring my physical limits. Like when I cycled to Australia, it was if I'm tired, I'll stop. And if I cycle 50 miles a day all the way to Australia, that's fine. I don't need to find out where I want to find my mental limits more than my physical.
We're
But
very... Sorry, carry on.
recently that has been shifting to, okay, if I can do that, what else can I make my body do? So I'm enjoying kind of testing my physical limitations as much as the mental.
Oh, no, that's cool. I think we're quite similar in that sense. For me, the 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 temptation of these big trips is much more about the mental development, the spiritual development, the exploration, the adventure, the providing that those vivid memories to my life more than it is pushing myself physically. Because and also the other thing is that you've got to take into account. You said if I cycle to Australia 50 miles a day, that's okay. As if 50 miles a day is something to have you to turn your nose up at. You know, 50 miles a day, that's tiring doing that consistently. Now, that's a long time in the saddle, depending on the terrain. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, though, because a lot of cyclists are just head down and they don't stop, aren't they?
Yeah, it definitely accumulates. When I say 50 miles a day, I think when you're on these trips, you just reach such a plateau
Yeah.
that 50 miles is kind of everyday routine. I think within 1 month of leaving England, I was fit. Within 2 months, I was really fit. And within 3 months, I could cycle all day. And it was just the mental monotony and boredom that I had to overcome.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to ask you about. How does isolation, loneliness affect you? Because there's a couple of different words to refer to being on your own. One is solitude, which sounds lovely and tranquil and blissful. Then one is isolation, which doesn't sound quite as nice. And I suppose the difference between those two things is literally your state of mind. How did you find it being on your own, such long days in the saddle, wild camping in different locations and constantly moving from place to place, making friends and having to leave them? How was that over a long period of time for you?
Yeah, I totally agree. Solitude and loneliness are two words to describe exactly the same thing, but all just depend on your mindset. Loneliness was definitely the biggest challenge of the trip. And I often describe that on this kind of trip, you're either really high or you're really low. There's no in between. So I kind of say it was 30% misery, 70% euphoria. It was actually a funny kind of loneliness, I guess, because I was meeting people every day. I'd have these incredible, exhilarating moments where you just connected with someone, but they only lasted as long as a cup of coffee or a meal. If I was really lucky, I'd stay with them for a night or 24 hours. But it was this kind of dizzying carousel of hello, goodbye, that I just found exhausting. And I found it kind of overwhelming that no one really knew me. I think it was just purely experience that I got to know who I am and also what I need. So it was almost like reverting to being a baby. So if I started feeling sad, it meant that I was hungry or tired or needed to drink or needed to rest or just needed to put myself out there and meet someone. So it was kind of, I don't think there's any shortcut to overcoming loneliness. It's something I still sometimes struggle with in these trips. I think I can be, I think being around lots of people can actually make it harder if you're on your own. So when I was on my tiny Norwegian island with just 3 or 4 others, I was never lonely. But when I've been in capital cities on my own and everyone's getting on with their day-to-day life, I think that can be really, really challenging them.
Mm. Mm. That's really interesting to hear you talking about it because, yeah, because like I said, I've been following you for a little while, and I suppose this is the other side to it, isn't it? This is the other side of the fun stories and the crazy photos and the mission statements and the blogs of like. I can imagine that this battle with loneliness and solitude and what you learn from that about yourself and how you deal with that is as valuable as any mountain range that you manage to conquer. You know, I imagine that so much of what you're learning on these trips is about your relationship with yourself and others.
Oh, absolutely. I very much kind of think of lessons in two types. You're either learning about yourself internally or you're learning about the world externally. And I think both are equally valuable, although maybe even the internal lessons are more important. And I'd say there are times in different trips where you learn more about yourself. So when I cycled for 2 months across the Australian outback, I just had so much thinking time to reflect on who I am, what I want, what makes me happy, what makes me sad, to the point that you're just repeating the same. By the end, I was repeating the same thoughts and just reaching the same answer. And I thought, wow, I need something new to happen because I've thought about everything it's possible for me to think without some new stimulus. And it's exactly the same when I was sailing. Kind of you're at sea for 3 months or 20 days at a time between land. And you just think, wow, there's nothing new that can enter my brain unless I see or read or speak to someone with a different point of view.
That is absolutely hilarious. You're like, thinking is finished.
Yeah, it's literally,
That's the
but
end of thinking.
you can't turn it off.
I've completed it.
Yeah, I've got nothing else to think about, but I'm still just going to keep repeating the same. It's like a record that just keeps spinning.
Yeah, but for some people, see, that would be really difficult because some people can't be alone with their own thoughts and some people would start to go crazy. So, like, was that experience for you, like, was it relatively, apart from getting bored, was it relatively peaceful? When you dive into the deepest depths of Joe Skeats' mind, do you like what you see? Are you tormented? Are you going crazy? Or are you relatively, this is all right. Yeah, I think I'm okay.
I think I'm very lucky to have quite a positive, optimistic disposition. But even with that, there have been days where I've woken up and it's like, okay, today's going to be a bad day. And if I'm on a boat, I hate everyone that I'm on a boat with and I don't want to see them. And I hate the way they brush their teeth and eat their food and the way they steer the steering wheel. And just, yeah, you're like, okay, this is really hard. And that's where you need to kind of work at it yourself insofar as you can. But I think it is just understanding that that is part and parcel of these adventures. And there's only so much you can do. I do think it fades the more you get to know yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the challenges.
Do you do any like spiritual or religious well-being practices in terms of like meditation or prayer or any daily habits that you need to do to keep yourself sort of physically and mentally grounded?
I've tried meditation over the years repeatedly, and I really would like to get more out of it. But I think kind of most of the things that I do are meditation without being forced or contrived like that. So I think when I'm cycling, it almost is like that, I'm stuck in the present moment, just focusing on the next pedal stroke. So although I have then sometimes sat down at the end of a day or in the morning to sit outside my tent and focus on my breathing, I think I do get enough meditation in the daily routine of every single day. So no, I don't have any habits. I think I'm kind of 50-50 introvert, extrovert. And I think I've really got an understanding of when I need to meet people. and when I need some time on my own to reflect, to read a book, to listen to a podcast. And it is just knowing myself, and do I need to be with people? Do I need to be on my own? And that is what I've learned and what helps in these situations.
So it sounds like you just know yourself very well. It was funny. The reason I was laughing just then about the idea of meditating after a long day cycling is because I know exactly what you mean. I know what it's like to be in the saddle all day and just completely present with what you're doing and your thoughts. And I was just laughing at the concept of the last thing you want to do at the end of the day is sit down and meditate. You want to, you're like, I've been doing this all day. I've been in my head all day. I can't do anymore.
That's it. I've tried, and it's like, okay, this is exactly the same. Well, it's the same on the boat. I can sail for a day, and I spend all day looking at the waves, watching the birds, listening to the waves, and then I sit down to try and meditate, and I'm so instantly distracted just because that's what I've been doing all day.
Yeah, you mentioned a minute ago cycling across the Australian outback you mentioned having monotonous thoughts when you were cycling across the Australian outback. But in terms of a monotonous terrain, it seems like the Australian outback is that. Now, maybe you can add some nuance to this, but I've got to say, I have looked into cycling many places all over the world, and there's very few of them that don't appeal to me. And I've got to say, mate, I love an adventure as much as the next guy. Believe me, I like an adventure, but cycling over the Australian outback does not interest me one bit. Am I wrong to have this skepticism? Is there something that I'm missing, or what was your experience of that?
Seb, my friend, you're totally wrong.
Wow.
I nearly included Australia as my most beautiful landscape when you asked that question, and Kyrgyzstan only just pipped it.
Wow. So you know what I'm thinking of, though, right? I'm just thinking of just desert and rocks for thousands of miles.
That's it. But
right.
When you zoom into that desert and rock, there is so much more to see. So when I was planning my route through Australia, I decided there's only one way to see Australia. I'm going to go straight through the middle in summer. I was kind of expecting this to be a monotonous, boring time. And there is a lot of that. But amongst that monotony and boredom, you do see and experience so much, and you kind of go on this internal journey. But every day was just a wave. So I had to be up at 4:00 cycling to beat the heat, and then I'd see a beautiful sunrise. The air was cool, nothing was trying to kill me yet. By about 10:00, it was too hot to cycle. I had to find shade. Sometimes that was a petrol station or a tree. Sometimes I simply had to tie a tarp blanket from my bike down into the sand and then lay beneath it for 7 hours.
What time was this, sorry?
This was between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m.
So you just couldn't cycle?
Too hot to eat, too hot to sleep, too hot to do anything but lay under a blanket in the shade. I used to think of kind of mum waking up in England on a frosty morning and watching the sunrise and thinking, oh, that's nice. But the same sun is literally killing me on the other side of the world. And then, I'd cycle from 5:00. It was cool enough to cycle. And I could do another couple of hours, watch the sunset before bed. But what was really special was just that vast sense of emptiness that I never got tired of. We just cannot appreciate it if we live in England. And things like the sunrise and sunsets, the night skies, where there's literally more stars than black areas. Wow. The indigenous Aborigines, they navigate not using the stars, but the black spaces between the stars. So whereas we have, it's amazing, it blows my mind. Whereas we have Orion's belt or the North Star, they have the giant black emu, which is a gap where there aren't any stars.
Wow.
And things like that. Because there's so few people and you think, wow, this is so hostile, nothing could live here. There's so much wildlife. There's camels and kangaroos and loads of lizards and snakes and scorpions. And the place is honestly just alive.
Wow.
And so, there was always something to watch, look at. The people you meet, you'd cycle 100 miles and then there'll be a tiny village of 8 or 9 people, 33% of them work in the pub. And they're just always interesting conversation.
Wow, that's amazing. So I couldn't be more wrong by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I genuinely loved it. And when you have to work hard to get somewhere, like I arrived at Uluru, Ayers Rock in the middle, and I think if I'd flown there, it wouldn't have had that wow factor. But after 3,000 kilometers of straight, empty, flat roads, it blew me away.
Because I thought when I saw your updates that you were cycling across the Australian outback, I assumed that what you were doing was choosing to do it despite the fact it was going to be monotonous and samey. And I could understand the mindset behind that. Like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to say that I've done it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to cycle across the Australian outback. But I just imagined that it was just going to be more uninteresting than the rest of your trip. So yeah, it's amazing to hear you speak about it the way you're speaking about it, to be honest with you.
I think it was obviously the end of my trip just before I reached Sydney. So it was kind of a decision. I want to give myself one final challenge to prove I'm worthy of having cycled to Australia. I don't want to finish with an easy trip around the coast. I want this to be tough, and I want to earn Sydney. I want to get in there absolutely shattered and broken and beaten and full of glory at the victory. But it was hard. There's no doubt about that. But it was great. There were rewards every day that just explained this is worth doing.
How far was it that you cycled across Australia? How long did it take?
So I think I did 6,000 kilometers through the outback from Darwin to Adelaide. And that was mostly on the... Yeah, 6,000.
That's insane. Well, in miles, that's about 4,000, isn't it?
That's about, 3,800.
Yeah.
And that was mostly without seeing any big towns except Alice Springs in the middle. A lot of straight roads. Even then, I was hunting for dirt roads off the side where possible. But even there were so many crazy moments. One day, a car pulled up beside the road and he handed me a can of lemonade. And he handed it to me and it was cold, so I put it on my forehead to cool off. And he asked all the usual questions, but he wasn't really listening. And I was like, what's up with this guy? And then he said, listen, I am so bored. I've got to drive all the way through the outback. I don't know how you crazy fools are cycling across this road. I'm so bored. Listen, I need to do something crazy. I'm going to take all my clothes off and I need you to take a photo to send to my missus. And I was like, what? And he said, I'm going to take all my clothes off and run straight down the road. And can you take a photo? I was like, sure. And then I said, hang on, I can't let you do this alone. So we both took our gear off. And then we hid behind a car. We hid behind his car to wait for another car to pass. And I said, what about if the police come? And this was kind of an ironic question because I could look down the road and see for 20 miles each way and there was nothing coming. And he said, don't worry, I'm a police officer. And he showed me his badge. And then I said, fantastic. So we both ran down the middle of the road in the center of Australia, just totally butt naked.
That's absolutely hilarious. Did you get some snaps of each other, yeah?
Yeah, I've got a few photos I can send you.
That's amazing.
It just shows, like, even in Australia, where you think it's going to be predictable and monotonous, the moment you're on an adventure, on a bike, like, open to different situations, even there, every day is unpredictable.
Yeah. I think there's something as well to be said for actually appreciating the beauty in different types of landscapes, even when they're monotonous. Like,
totally.
In England, we've got the moors, like Dartmoor, and there's something kind of just barren and windswept about it. But you have to see the beauty in that. It's not as epic and glorious as the Lake District, for example, but you have to try and see the beauty in different places. So I do completely understand everything that you're saying about Australia now. Yeah,
that's 100% true. But even to take that a step further, there's some countries that I circled about that weren't really beautiful. I'm trying to think of examples.
Was like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. What are they like?
I mean, they're also desert. They're also flat desert, kind of 600 kilometers between villages.
I've obviously got some like personal vendetta against desert regions for some reason, which doesn't make any sense because I've never been to one.
I mean, go to one and check it out.
Yeah. I think I need to.
You might surprise yourself. They're definitely a different kind of beauty.
Yeah.
I met one cyclist who said, I love the desert because they expect so much, they demand so much, but provide so little. And so it's like the ultimate test. And he hunted out deserts everywhere he cycled.
That's amazing. Wow. So what countries did you go through which were less beautiful, and did you enjoy them for other reasons?
I mean, I'm definitely going to offend some countries here. I kind of think generally where I didn't enjoy the beauty of a country. It was where I took the wrong route. So there were definitely I didn't enjoy much of Germany, and that was because I chose to cycle beside the River Rhine, which was very industrial. Um, there were parts of Turkey I absolutely loved, parts of it that also I probably chose the wrong route. But in these countries, there's something else to appreciate. Maybe it's the food, maybe it's the people, maybe it's I don't know, the colors and smells or the religion or so even India. Much of the route I cycled in India was big cities and not beautiful landscapes. But because of the people, because of the food, there was something else to appreciate.
So that actually goes back to the other question that how long did it take you to cycle across Australia and then also India as well?
So I think it was 4 months across India and 2 months through the middle of Australia,
Wow.
and then kind of 3 or 4 months around the coast.
Wow. Wow. So Australia was the country that you did the most cycling in?
Yeah, Australia was the most.
Yeah.
I spent a full 6 months cycling in Australia.
Which country, I don't know if I asked a variation on this. I think I asked what the most beautiful was. Which country did you enjoy the most in terms of adventure and unpredictable experience?
That would be a toss-up between Tajikistan, the Pamir Highway, and India. What you were saying about the Pamir Highway earlier, it's such an accessible kind of trip. There's people that I think it's the trip where I met the most other cyclists. And that's partly because it's only uncovered from snow for about 6 months of the year. It's a bit of a bottleneck. So all the people doing big round the world trips like me get funneled onto this one road through the mountains within the same kind of June, July, August, summer months. But also because it is so beautiful and so stunning, you get all the people on their summer holidays that are just going out for 2 weeks or 3 weeks just to cycle the Pamir Highway. So I think, like I said, I think I probably met about 100 cyclists in a single month. And some of them were around the world cyclists. Some of them were just there for a short summer holiday. And yeah, that was exciting. You'd cycle with someone for a week or two, or even a day, camp together and then split off and find someone else to cycle with. And yeah, it was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, that sounds amazing because I suppose you get the best of both worlds then. You get the beautiful, expansive scenery and terrain and that sense of adventure, but you also get a bit of socialization and camaraderie.
Yeah, definitely. You can get as much or as little of that as you want. You can either go off and find yourself in this kind of lunar landscape in the mountains, or you can cycle with kind of as many as you want. I think the most I cycled with was 9 or 10 people.
Wow.
And that lasted 2 or 3 days, and we'd have a laugh and then split. One person would leave, someone else would join. It was definitely a challenge. I was up above 4,000 meters for about 3 weeks. And when I eventually came down from the mountain, I hadn't realized how much the altitude was affecting me. But I was like waking up out of a coma. I'd look at my camera, flick through photos, and I'd think, wow, that's beautiful. But I don't remember taking that photo.
Wow.
And I'd lost 12 kilos of weight. So it was really a challenge.
You must have camped in your 3 years. You must have an eclectic selection of wild camping spots. I mean, I remember reading your blog about, yeah, this was your blog, about cycling across Burma. What, isn't it illegal to wild camp in Burma and you're there like hiding out in the jungle every night or something?
Yeah, that. I literally went paranoid over a month in Burma. So we haven't really discussed, but this trip was straight out of university. So I was on a budget of £4 a month, £4 a day. So I really didn't have a lot of money to spend on hotels or hostels, and even some nights in Southeast Asia where hostels are £3. I remember looking at it and thinking, I can't afford that. I'll just cycle another 2 kilometers and camp in the bush.
Wow.
But in Myanmar, in Burma, you have to stay in accommodation every single night, and it's illegal to wild camp. But I just didn't have the money for this. This was towards the end of my trip. And so literally every night I was trying to get as far away from hostels and hotels so that if the police found me, I hoped they'd have a sense of empathy and wouldn't make me cycle back. But I was literally hiding in bushes. I was jumping into drainage ditches beneath the road and kind of sleeping beneath the road with trucks rumbling overhead. But yeah, I did love the wild camping aspect. I got kind of a rebellious thrill, and I still do. I absolutely love wild camping. kind of in a rebellious way. Oh, I'm not meant to be here. And so I slept in bus stations, in temples, in on roundabouts, anywhere I thought I could get away and be disturbed for a night. And that became kind of an adrenaline way to sleep.
What was the yeah? What was the sort of weirdest, most most out there place that you slept in? Would you say?
Wow, you're really asking now. I think in Eastern Europe, I slept in kind of lots of bombed out buildings and
Wow.
broken down, dilapidated old shepherd's huts, that kind of thing. But yeah, the full bus stations, train stations,
Were you?
oh,
How much
police
sleep were you
stations.
needing? Like, I mean, I like my beauty sleep. This is the issue I have, right? When I did Land's End to John O'Groats, I did about a third of it was wild camping, about a third of it I stayed in hotels, and about a third of it I stayed at my friend's house. Now, you probably think that's pathetic, but like I like my beauty sleep. I'll wild camp, and I'm sure I'd get used to it if I went on a longer trip. But I'll wild camp for a few nights, and I'm just like, fucking hell, get me a bed. Like, what was the situation with you? Were you wild camping every night for literally like weeks or months? Like, were you ever like, I need a bed, and how much sleep do you actually need before you can go and cycle another 50 miles?
Yeah, honestly, sleep is my superpower. I don't know if this was the case before the trip, but definitely during and after. I think partly when you've cycled 50, 60 miles, I was so tired that I'd just conk out anywhere. But
Right.
I could sleep on a bed of rubble in a bombed out house in Bosnia, and I was going to sleep the full night. Nothing was going to wake me. I often joked that you could steal the tent while I was sleeping, and I'd just wake up on the floor, or you could steal my bike outside. So yeah, I was sleeping the full 8, 9 hours a night without much issue.
That's
Um,
great. That's great. I think the reason I would struggle is I think I would actually struggle to do that. I think I'd be one of them people that's waking up a lot. But I think you probably really get used to it, don't you? You probably just get into the rhythm of it, and you're because I was watching a podcast and it was saying how I was watching a podcast about sleep, and it was Matthew Walker on Joe Rogan, and he was saying about how when you sleep in somewhere where you're not used to staying, only half your brain shuts down because evolutionarily it would have been advantageous, obviously, to be like on alert. So if you're not staying in your bed and even if you're just staying in a hotel room or something, that half of your brain is still awake when you sleep because you're in
wow,
because you're in foreign territory. And I guess maybe like, yeah, maybe it might. Did you find that sleeping in all these random different places every night that your ability to relax and wind down improved as it went on, or were you just cool with that straight away?
that's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can totally see that you do feel so vulnerable. Like when you get in your tent and the outside world is kind of not shut out at all, only in sight, which is actually more scary. You still hear the sounds, and in fact, the sounds are amplified. So a rabbit in the bushes sounds like a bear or a wolf that's coming to get you. And so yeah, it probably wasn't the same quality of sleep. I think it's something I learned along the way, but I was quite blessed with good sleep beforehand. There were times where I was so sleep deprived that I was definitely getting paranoid. So I remember in Turkey, I was camping and I heard a gun click, like be loaded outside my tent. And I went up and stood outside and I was on a flat mountain plateau. And in the moonlight, I could see for miles and there was no one there. And the moment I got back in my tent, I heard the gun load again. And I was like, okay, my mind must have been making it up before, but I definitely heard it that time. And I ended up standing outside the tent like 8 or 9 times, every time thinking I was going to be looking down the barrel of a gun. And then I was like hallucinating, seeing car headlights pointing at my tent, and I was hearing people and seeing people. And yeah, so there were stages where I was definitely so sleep deprived that I wasn't getting the good sleep I needed. But generally, it was okay.
I remember cycling across the Lake District, and it just started pissing it down with rain. And I think I'd done about 70 miles that day, and I had to get to a campsite, and I just sacked it in. So I just started pushing my bike across this field, and it was the first time I'd ever wild camped on my own. And I'm pushing my bike across this field in the rain, and I'm finding this tree, and I'm setting up my tent under the tree, right? And I was actually scared. I was actually scared. Like, I was lying there in this dark field. in the Lake District, underneath a tree, rain pouring, wind. And yeah, like I rang up my brother. I was 26 years old. And I rang up my brother, who's my big brother. And I was just saying, like, look, like, I know this sounds ridiculous, yeah, but like I'm literally ringing my big brother because I'm scared.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, what you need to think about it is this. You're the one that they should be afraid of. He's like, imagine you're wandering through the Lake District and through a field in the middle of the night and you just see some tent out of nowhere with some man in there. You'd be terrified. Yeah, you're the one that they should be. No need to be scared if you're the one that they should be scared of. And then I was just lying in bed that night like, yeah, I'm the fucking crazy guy in the field, man. You stumble across me, there's going to be problems, you know. But no, I mean,
remember...
like... It is scary, I reckon. I mean, I got better at it, but like you're hearing all the noises of the animals. And in England, you know, you're telling your stories from around the world. In England, you only got foxes and badgers, but when you're lying and sleep in the middle of the night and you're hearing scurrying, it's like, what the fuck is going on out there? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, man. It's so true. Like I say, camping, you are so vulnerable, but you got to realize that other people are going to be just as scared as you.
Right.
I remember when I was planning for this trip, I read the blog of Tom Allen, who's another cyclist. And he said the best place to camp is graveyards. And the reason is because people are too scared to go around graveyards at night. And so if you go there, then chances are you'll have a nice, quiet, peaceful night on your own.
Wow. Have you slept in any graveyards?
Yeah, I have. That was actually my go-to. If I was struggling, if I found myself in a town or city at the end of a day and I had nowhere to camp, it was like, okay, I'll head for the graveyard. And no one goes there at night.
Oh my God, that is absolutely hilarious. What was the, like, you told that story just then, which sounded pretty like, pretty scary. Was there any other moments on the trip, like either related to camping or just cycling or just anything? Like if you had to say the most scared you were on any of your adventures, have you got a story which like something that really shook you up or any close calls?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I've only got positive stories to share because when you do go on this trip, you realize the world is much more friendly and it's not like the news. But there were definitely times where things went wrong. I mean, the most scary times of my trip were always traffic, which is a really boring answer. But cycling across India or across Australia, where you've got the giant road trains hurtling past on a single lane road, that is scary. I mean, in terms of things going wrong, I got arrested twice by corrupt policemen. So in Uzbekistan, I got arrested the first time. And because the country is a dictatorship, you have to stay in a hotel every 3 nights. And the hotel will register you. So then the police can kind of track where you've been in their country and know that you're not a spy, for instance. But the trouble for me was that the country is 600 kilometers of desert. And I couldn't cycle that in 3 days. So I had all these gaps in my registration slips. So when the police caught up with me, they arrested me and demanded to know where I'd been in their country. And this time it was kind of, I showed them I was cycling, showed them the desert on the map, 600 kilometers, Niet Hotel. And kind of I flattered them. Because I'd done something wrong, I had to really get on their good side. And I showed them photos on my camera. Uzbekistan, the most beautiful country in the world. Their police officers, the most handsome police officers in the world. And eventually they let me go. And then 3 days later in Tajikistan, I got arrested again. And this time it was purely corrupt policemen.
3 days later?
Yeah, 3 days later. Not a bad record, eh?
No, not bad at all, mate.
Yeah, they arrested me and said, if you give us $30, we'll let you go. If you give us $30, we let you go. And this time they were just trying their luck, like trying to get money. I was the rich tourist. They probably didn't earn very much money. And they were showing me their guns. They were punching their fists. And I was like, okay, they know I've done nothing wrong. I know I've done nothing wrong. It's kind of a game. So I sat down on the street, folded my arms, like acted like I was really pissed off.
Oh, good for you.
Like, no, you're getting nothing. Because if they take money from me, then they're just going to be motivated to do it to the next guy that comes along. So eventually they took me to the police station, like bundled me into a police car, took me to the police station. And then they said, if you give us $30, we'll let you go. And this time, because I'd done nothing wrong, I decided to bluff. So I was kind of, oh, we got a bed, got a shower, got a toilet. I'll stay here. Thanks. Out there, I'm camping. What's the Wi-Fi password? For breakfast, I'll have my eggs sunny side up. And after like an hour or two, they realized they weren't going to get $30, and they let me go.
That's good, mate. I really like your approach to that. That it takes some balls, and that was definitely the best thing to do as well, because they knew they were doing something wrong. They do just try it on. A lot of police in a lot of these countries do just completely take the piss and just try and squeeze cash out of people, don't they? And I think yeah, I think you did the right thing. I think a lot of people would have probably paid the $30 when they were actually going to get taken to the police station. You know, like
Yeah, I mean, I might. I'm not saying this was brave or clever. I think it was probably quite stupid and foolish. But I was what? I was 23, 24 years old, and $30
Nah,
was a week of travel.
yeah, you played a game of chicken and you came out on top. I think you did the right
That's it,
thing.
mate.
Any other standout stories? I mean, I'm sure you've got hundreds, but if you were to share a story which is one of your favorites, whether it be the most the one with the biggest wow factor or the funniest, or yeah, just give us a story, man. I'm sure you got
One,
loads.
give you a story.
Yeah.
Okay, let me set the scene. I'm in Vietnam, and it's about 1 o'clock, and I haven't found anywhere to get food. I'm on this remote road through the jungle, and I'm absolutely starving, looking for a restaurant or a shop where I can buy food, cycling along, and suddenly I see a restaurant beside the road, and I think, great. I walk straight into the restaurant, sit down at a table, and the waitress comes up and she says, "Okay, what do you want?" And I say, "Oh, I'm really hungry. I'd like a big portion of food. I'd like it quickly, please. Big portion, quickly, please. I'm starving." And she totters off to the kitchen to give the order. And I put my tent out to dry. I've washed some clothes, so I put them on the backs of the chairs. Luckily, I'm the only person in the restaurant. I plug my laptop in to charge. I sit down and start writing my diary. And after about 5 minutes, I'm looking around the restaurant, hoping my food's going to come soon. And I see some family photos on the wall. And I suddenly realize that this doesn't look very much like a restaurant. And then the waitress comes back and she says, "Come, follow me." And she leads me through the family house, past the bedrooms, kitchen, toilets. And she sits me down in
Shut
the
up.
lounge,
Shut
and her
up.
whole family is sitting there on the floor with a plate with a feast in front of them, and there's a plate for me at the head. And I sit
You,
down really awkwardly because I now realize this wasn't a restaurant. And I had Google Translate in my phone, and I typed onto my phone, "Thank you. I'm really sorry. I thought this was a restaurant. Is this your house?" And I gave the phone to them to type back. And the reply that came back was golden. It just said, "Yes, we were wondering why you were here." and, and so I just walked into this family house, put my tent out, put my clothes out, plugged all my electricals in, and demanded food, a big portion, quickly.
Oh
And
my god, mate, that's so funny, and how they actually made it for you as well.
yeah, I think they were having I think it was an engagement party that I'd just gate crashed
Wow.
because there were two families there, and so I ate with them, and then I was, "Oh, thank you, sorry, thank you, I go now." And she said, "No, no, it's too hot now. You sleep here for 3 hours and then leave." And I was like, "Okay." So I slept for 3 hours in a hammock, and then I said, "Okay, thank you, sorry, I go now." And then she said, "No, no, it'll be dark in 2 hours. You sleep here tonight." So I ended up having dinner with them again. And then that night I shared a bed with the eldest son. And just as I was falling asleep, he rolled over and he gave me an old iPod, one of the shuffles without a screen. And he said, "This is so you remember me." And I handed it
Oh.
back and said, "No, man, I'm never going to forget you. This has been awesome."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the iPod, him giving you the iPod is the least memorable part of the day.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you know what I mean? I don't need the iPod, mate. Trust me, I'm gonna
Just
remember it.
the feast was enough.
Wow, mate, that's quite the story. Why did you think it was a restaurant?
So it was obviously in a different script, a different language, and
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
a board outside the house,
Right.
and they sold. It was like for gardening stuff. So they sold plants.
Okay, cool.
But
So
I thought
you
it
just
was
thought it
fancy
was
in a restaurant, and they had like an open plan dining room at the back,
right. Okay.
glass fronted onto the road, looked like a
That
restaurant.
That's hilarious, and it really, it really does say a lot about how friendly people are out there. out there in the world, because you do just hear again and again about people cycling across countries and just being met with amazing kindness, amazing acts of generosity. And if there's ever a story that proves it, it's probably just the fact that, like, was that just a complete coincidence that you stumbled across the nicest people in Vietnam, or could you have just walked into other people's houses and demanded your dinner? I wonder how many times you could have done that before someone's like, nah, mate, get out of here. Like,
Oh, dude, I could tell you 100 stories of just people showing the utmost hospitality. Honestly, if you
Yeah.
want to restore your faith in humanity, get on a bike and pedal. I'm sure you found the same. Even in Lansington on a goat. So I remember I was writing these stories and people were saying, oh, but you wouldn't get that in England. And I think you would. I
Yeah,
think
you do.
when you got on a bike, yeah, maybe you can share, but when you got on a bike, you just realize that your vulnerability, and because you actually need stuff. I mean, most of the time we're alive, we don't need food or water or somewhere to sleep or somewhere to go to the toilet. But when you really need that, there's always someone that's going to give it to you.
I think people respect it. I think people respect cyclists, not like cyclists as in, like, certainly drivers don't respect cyclists in cities, but I just mean I think people respect, whether it be cyclists or hitchhikers or walkers, people respect people that are on a mission. And I think people want to be part of that mission, you know?
I think,
Because
yeah, I think that's spot on.
like people, if you're it's just as much of a story and experience for them to invite you into their house for an evening as you cycle across India as it is for you to have that experience.
Yeah, you're totally right. And by the end, I mean, I thought of it as a team effort. I didn't think of it as me cycling to Australia. I thought of it as everyone that had been part of my journey had played a really valuable, important part. And to the point that the trip wouldn't have been the same without them.
I also think, I wonder whether it's something to do with actually the mode of transport itself. Like, you have more sympathy for a cyclist trying to fix a flat tire on the side of the road than you might be someone broken down in a car, for example, because you know that if that cyclist doesn't fix their issue, that they're going to be such a long way away from anywhere else. I think we just might have a little inbuilt more sympathy for people traveling by bike out there in the great outdoors.
That's it. Your vulnerability is your
Yeah.
superpower. It's so
Yeah, yeah.
scary to be that vulnerable, but when you do open yourself up, people respect that.
Yeah, and I guess it's not just that you're vulnerable, it's also that you're doing something that's quite courageous and interesting. So they're simultaneously in awe of you, but while also wanting to help you. And that's an interesting mix, because they can kind of look up to you and think that what you're doing is incredible and amazing, but at the same time realize that they can play a part in actually helping the more vulnerable side of it. And I think actually, if you get down to the nitty gritty of it, that's probably like quite a rare combination, that you can have those two things at the same time.
Yeah, you're spot on. I just add to that I also, just as much as the people that wanted to be part of the trip, I respected the people that just wanted to help me purely because I was another human, another person out there. So there were some people that invited me in and didn't ask a single question about the trip and just weren't bothered at all where I was cycling or what I was doing. All they knew was that I was someone that was dirty, that needed a shower, that had holes in my clothes, that looked hungry and thirsty, and was planning to sleep in a tent that night. And they could improve that situation. And they didn't care where I was going, who I was. I was just someone that needed help. And that's equally amazing.
Definitely. I hitchhiked across Thailand once, and I did it with no other luggage other than a plastic bag
Hey, I love this story the most.
tied to a mop. And it was just mental. It was a Morrison's plastic bag tied to a pink mop over my shoulder, like Dick Whittington. And I had a pair of Angry Birds slippers on and a cowboy hat, and I was just like, just out on the open road, not giving a fuck about anything. It was brilliant. And
I hope you know I don't consider myself an adventurer until I imitate this trip.
you know what, mate? Honestly, like, so many of the stuff I've done was like pre-YouTube and before I was even like if I did something like that now, I'd have to film it. You know, I'd have to make videos, and yet like, I almost feel like there's trips I need to go and do again just to film them. Like, I almost feel I need to go back to Thailand, get the mop out, the plastic bag, just to film it, because there's so many adventures which, I mean, they live on in my memories and stories, obviously. But anyway, but just going back on what you were saying a second ago about being vulnerable, like, I had that experience a couple of times in Thailand when I was hitchhiking, and that doesn't mean hitchhike in Thailand. And obviously, you can imagine I learnt that quite quickly.
Yeah.
Because I'm driving along and people were literally, I'm standing on the side of the road going like that, and people will go beep, beep, beep. And they give me a thumbs up. They think I'm just there giving them a thumbs up. They go like that, literally. And I was like, come on. I'm not just standing here giving all cars thumbs up. What do you think I'm doing? So eventually I had to start hopping into the middle of the road and just going like, first of all going like that, and then going like that. Like, because that means like, thank you, cap and that in Thailand, going like that. And then people started pulling over. But like, one guy one day, he was like a soldier, I think, or he had like a soldier get up on. And I was trying to tell him that I'm just hitchhiking, I'm just trying to get as far down the road as possible. And he basically took me off road, and I was on the back of his bike for about half an hour, and he dropped me off in the front of a police station because he thought he was helping me out. So he thought that I was lost and that he was helping me. Like, yeah. And I'm just there, just like, oh yeah, thank you. Just like, for fuck's sake. So I had to obviously try and get back to the main road. So that was one instance of someone helping me. But then another time was two actual policemen kept me on the side of the road for ages as they were waving cars past, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And then they disappear, and they come back, and they go into the shop, and they just bought me loads of like food and snacks and given me some money and stuff. And I gave the money back, but again, it was like they didn't know what I was doing. They had no interest in hitchhiking. They weren't remotely impressed by my plastic bag with a mop on it, you know. Or they were not in on this joke. They just saw me looking kind of sweaty and hairy on the side of the road, and they just, like you say, they just wanted to help. And I imagine you experienced that, like you say, like hundreds and hundreds of times. But it is remarkable when a complete stranger just gives you something. Yeah, even if it's just a bottle of water or a meal, they're just like, here you go, fellow human. And as you were saying, we don't have the opportunity to do that in this country very often, I don't think.
No, because people don't need a bottle of water or some snacks. We don't see people hitchhike. I'd love to see more hitchhikers beside the road and pick them up in my car and say, hey, where do you need to go? I'd love to see more of that in our society, just kind of this sharing culture.
And I think that comes full circle, actually, to the start of this conversation about why do we do these things. And I think the reason that so many people don't do these things is because they're completely unaware how much it would improve their life if they did. And I even apply this not to massive hitchhike adventures, not to cycling across continents, but just even for me in my own life, the simple act of regularly driving about an hour out of Bristol in any direction and going to the Brecon Beacons, the Cotswolds, the Mendips, and going on loads of different hikes. And I've done so many dozens of hikes in the hour area outside of Bristol, and yet so many people I know never do anything like that. And I know that they would love it if they did. And it just seems like effort to them, like learning like another language or something, like, oh, where do I find a walk? And how do I know that I'm going the right way? And like, how do I get there? And oh, it might have been raining. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And then they just don't do it. As if it's complicated, as if it's difficult. And it's like, literally, drive an hour out of Bristol, go on a 3-hour walk and drive back. You've spent 5 hours out of your day, just not even half your day, and you will see how much it does for your life, for your mental well-being, you know? And I just wish more people, that I could share that with more people, you know?
I mean, I totally agree. I think this is why adventure is so important. And it doesn't need to be, and this is what I've realized recently, it doesn't need to be cycling around the world or sailing across an ocean. Like your wild swimming, 100 days of wild swimming, is such a small, it doesn't impact your day at all in a burdensome way, but it can totally transform what you get out of each day. I mean, some of those swims, I'm sure they took you less than an hour, substantially less than an hour to complete, but you're still feeling the benefit in the evening when you did it in the morning. And it is scary. You are pushing your comfort zone. And I would say to people, don't feel you have to totally obliterate your comfort zone. Start small. But do find ways to, when something is, that's scary, when it does cause you to tense and it is slightly outside your comfort zone, don't just say no. Or at least ask yourself why you're saying no and look for reasons to overcome those. I mean, Most people would call them obstacles. Some others might call them excuses.
Yeah, again, we have come full circle. Again, we're back to what you were saying at the start about how suffering and struggle is part of the reward. Like, we have got to a point as humans that we're so comfortable in our part of the world, in Western parts of the world. We're so comfortable. We have a roof over our head, all the food we need, and running water, and everything we need to make our lives more comfortable. And we're fundamentally very disconnected from nature. But
Yeah.
we, as humans, did not evolve to be comfortable all the time, and we did not evolve to be disconnected from nature. And so having a tiny bit of struggle in nature, it's getting back to the roots, I think, of what... It's getting in touch with something ancient. It's getting in touch with something beyond our lives and our experiences. It's going back through our evolutionary DNA, which is formed over tens of thousands of years, which is we're not supposed to be this comfortable, and we're not supposed to be inside, and not everything's supposed to be easy all the time, you know?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of society is pulling us more and more away from our roots and what we should be doing. I've been working as a hiking guide and doing lots of Duke of Edinburgh assessments with children this year. And I see time and time again that they just have very little connection with their outside world. But when they do, they don't need to have been there long, and they very quickly see the benefits. And they don't need to be in abroad or in the mountains of the Lake District or Snowdonia, but they can be in the Mendips or the New Forests or the Chilterns, and just local places that are more or less on their doorstep. And they can have the best, most transformative experience of their life.
I know, that's it. And it's a beautiful thing when you go on a walk or a bike ride with someone that doesn't do it very often, and you're kind of half an hour in or you're an hour in, and you know that the endorphins have started flowing in them a little bit, and they're looking across like the fields or the wood or whatever, and they're just like, wow. And it's just like, yeah, it's that simple. It's that simple.
That gives me goosebumps just thinking about that. I'm jealous of people just discovering this,
I know, right?
How easy it is.
I know. It's amazing. So let's round things up, mate. This has been a really great conversation. Let me ask you one last thing. What have you got coming up, mate? What plans have you got? And if it's not penciled in yet, like even long term, what are some things that you want to do? So short term and long term, what you got coming up, mate?
Oh, thank you very much. So my next and current adventure is sailing across to the Caribbean. I've got a school friend who owns a boat, and he's been planning this trip for 10 years. One day, I'm going to go on a big sailing adventure to the Caribbean. And it's one of those things where I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, yeah. And every month he's gone on a big sailing trip just for a couple of weeks or a month. And he's always said, one day I'm going to sail to the Caribbean. And I never thought it was going to happen. And then suddenly with COVID, he had enough time to get his sailing qualifications. And he also kind of realized time is short. He's never going to be totally ready. So he said, okay, I'm leaving now. And I got a space on this boat. So I've just finished 7 weeks of sailing down to Tenerife. We've left the boat out in Tenerife. And then when the hurricane season finishes in the Caribbean, we're going to cross back over. We're going to fly back up to Tenerife, sail across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean, spend 2 months island hopping and beach hopping, and then sail back to England. So that's December to April next year.
Wow. December to April, as in this.
So December 2021 to April 2022.
Amazing. Well, mate, we're gonna have to do another podcast next year, man. Like, you're gonna have to tell me about that trip. We'll have to do one specifically about that.
Mate, I look forward to it.
If you would be happy to join me again.
I'd love it. This has been a blast. I'm glad we finally managed to get a chat, and hopefully we'll have a beer in future one day.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. One last thing, mate. Is there any social media links, website, or anything that you would like to share before we say goodbye?
Yeah, so I'm Josiah Skeats, Josiah, and then surname Skeats, Skeats, on Facebook and Instagram. And you'll also find my website, josiahskeats.com, where you can read about all my past adventures and then the current sailing one too.
Yeah, mate, and I really enjoy following you 100%. Every time I see what you're up to, I'm just like, my eyes fall out my head half the time. It's great. I get a real thrill out of reading what you're up to. I hope everything goes well with your sailing trip. And yeah, mate, thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's been awesome.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Cheers.